So, uh, one of the things I love about life is that we get choice, right? Now, when we're younger, and if you're young in here, sometimes you're like, I don't got any choice. My parents tell me everything to do. Well, that's true. As parents, that's our right to tell you what you have to do and what you don't have to do, up until a certain point when you become an adult and you get to do your own little things and all that good stuff. But one of the things I love in life is that we do get choices. We get to choose what we eat, what we like to eat. I remember as a kid, my dad, he was a single dad for a while, and he used to make like 5 meals. And they were the same 5 meals almost every single week. And so I didn't really get a choice on what I ate because he was of the age and of the time period where he said, if you put it on my plate, you're eating it. Anybody else grow up that way? If it was put on your plate, you had to eat it. I don't know how he eats his food to this day because he just throws everything on one pile, like green beans mixed with mashed potatoes, mixed with meat, mixed with like cranberry sauce, and it just all mixed together, and he just eats it. He's like, it all goes to the same place. I'm like, but man, that is disgusting. Like, how do you eat all that? But I didn't have a choice growing up. Like the food that I ate on Monday, or I can't remember what day it was, but there was a fish stick day. I don't know that I've ever eaten real fish, but I don't like fish sticks, and so today I choose not to eat fish because I've never experienced good fish. And so it's like disgusting. And then we had hot tamale days, which I kind of admit I like those. They were from a can, like you just like. It was disgusting, but it was good. It was really good. Then we had pigs in a blanket. It's like all these things, and I didn't have a choice. I had to eat those things. But as I've grown as an adult, I've gotten the ability to have more and more choices. And this is what I'm getting at. As people who follow Jesus, we have the choice to follow Jesus, right? That is our choice. You are here. If you're a kid, you're here because your parents are here. But as an adult, you're here. You are choosing to be here and to learn and to want to absorb truth about who Jesus is and what he wants and what he expects in our life. That's your choice. You have chosen to come sit here. I have chosen to do this as a profession, and I get to stand up here and preach every once in a while or get to do other things. These are the choices that we have made. And I'm thankful for those choices, and I'm thankful that Jesus gives us that choice because here's the deal. I never liked having to eat what my dad made me eat. I liked eating what I like to eat. And because as an adult I have chosen that Jesus is who I want to follow, and this way of life is what I've chosen to experience, I chose that. And because I chose that, I'm passionate about it. I love it. I love being able to do the things that I get to do on a day in and day out basis. And I love all that stuff because I chose it. And so Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount really is dealing with this idea of this choice. Like he's saying there is a way, there is this kingdom life that you can experience. 100%. There's this kingdom life that you can experience. But if you choose to experience it, there are some things that come along with it. And so as we have talked through the Sermon on the Mount, we in chapter 5 we were talking through this idea of just all of these things. It wasn't just the action, but it was how you thought about it. And we talked through all kinds of things, and this kingdom is talking about this character. He says this kingdom is a kingdom that welcomes the bankrupt, those who are disappointed in life, those who can't do it on their own. It's a kingdom of justice, and it's a kingdom of mercy at the same time. Those who belong to this kingdom, who have chosen to be a part of this kingdom, are ambassadors of peace, even in this life, even if you're persecuted in this life. They let people see the good in their lives so that others too will come to know about this kingdom, about this God who we follow, about this Jesus character who we put all of our hope into. And so he says, this is the hope of everything. You choose to live this life. You choose to follow me. You choose to follow this way. This is what we experience. And then he says in chapter 5, and I'm going to give a brief summary. If you haven't been here, we are knee-deep in the Sermon on the Mount, and so we're going to give a brief what we've been talking about through this chapter. He explains this. He says, it isn't just enough to conform to the rules of God in our external behavior. He wants us to change from the inside. And remember, this is all that we've been talking about over chapter 5. He wants us to change from the inside. He wants us to resolve our anger. He wants us to restrain from any sexual desire that's out of bounds. He wants us to refuse to divorce just because we're not happy in our marriage or we're tired of being married. He wants us to be truthful from the inside out, to forgive those who have wronged us, and finally to love the people who don't even love us. And so as we jump into chapter 6, and that's what we're getting ready to do, we're going to jump into chapter 6. There's this idea that our motives matter as well. There are acts of worship that happen on a regular basis. And Jesus kind of starts to hit on those acts of worship. And he says this, he's like, people perform acts of worship for many, many reasons. But those who belong to the kingdom of God, those who follow Jesus, we need to watch our motives. We need to understand that our motives need to be in the right place. It's not just an issue of what you do to worship God, but the reasons why you do it are critically important. And so Jesus introduces this subject right at the beginning of chapter 6, verse 1. And it starts with this general rule. We're going to call this a general rule, and for the next 3 or 4 weeks, this is kind of where we're springboarding from, okay? So you have this general rule that Jesus puts out right in verse 1, and then he's going to talk about it for a while. But in verse 1, he says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Now, if you think back to what we've already studied in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus was talking about righteousness, and that this is a good behavior of those who want to follow him. Those who strive for righteousness are the people who are trying to follow Jesus. Those who want to belong to this kingdom that he's talking about. And in 5, he said that if you want to be part of this kingdom, your righteousness needs to be better than who? We've talked about this. Who's it got to be better than? What? Hey, this is audience participation day. Y'all can do it. Better than who? Pharisees. Somebody said it in the back. Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Okay, that's what he tells us. He says, you got to be, and what did we say about them? We did this kind of whole thing where the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were, from all perception, the religious leaders, the hierarchy, the ones that everybody looked at and said, man, I want to be like them. I strive to be like them because they do no wrong. They are correct in all that they do. And Jesus is saying, listen, you think that they're correct, but you, in order to be a follower, choosing to follow me, requires you to be better than the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And so God wants you to follow him, but not only in behavior, but in your heart. And that's all we've been talking about. And now he says something else you need to watch. He says, your motives. When you do good things, these acts of righteousness, make sure you're doing it for God and not so that other people see the good things that you're doing. We get the word theater from this acts of righteousness. And so he's saying, like, don't act a part so that people look good, make you feel good about what you're doing. Don't do these acts of righteousness so that when somebody comes and gives you a pat on the back, you feel really, really good about that. He wants people who are fully devoted to him. He wants those who want to do it because they're motivated by their love for him, not by looking good in front of other people. How can I look good to my neighbor or my friends? Here's the deal. Some people can go to church. We're here on Sunday morning. It may look good to some people. You can give to the poor. You can say a prayer. You can give up a bad habit for Lent. Some people are motivated to do these things because they want to impress God. But sometimes people are motivated because they want the attention of someone else, some other person. And it feels great when you're noticed for something that you do like that. Maybe you're trying to impress your pastor, maybe your fiance, maybe your friends, maybe your parents or kids or something. You're trying to impress people, and so you do these things, these acts of righteousness, these acts of worship that Jesus is talking about here. And the truth is, everybody should have these acts of righteousness. They should. But Jesus says if you're involved in a lot of religious activity just so people can notice that, he's saying you're not really devoted to God, and it doesn't mean anything to God. And that's not what it's about. Don't do good things so that people will see you doing good things and think that you're a great person. So that's the general rule that Jesus is trying to teach us here. That is that general rule. He's saying, listen, be careful about your acts of righteousness. Be careful. This is the overarching thing. Be careful about your acts of righteousness. Be careful with them so that you know your motives are correct. Don't try to impress other people or you'll miss God's reward. If your motive for going to church or doing good or helping others or praying to God is out of some religious duty, if you're doing those things to impress people around you, it means nothing. And see, it's always easy to understand a general rule, a good principle, if you got some examples to follow, right? We all, it's easier to do that. And so what Jesus does is he gives this overarching awesome principle. Be careful how you do your acts of worship because you don't want to just try to impress people. You more want to impress God. That's really what you need to be striving to do. And he says, okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of this. So he takes some of the biggies that he would have seen the Pharisees and scribes doing. Because, again, we're still trying to have, we're still trying to do better than the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And so he's saying, watch out for these things. And he's saying, watch out for them so much that I'm going to talk about them. And he says he's talking through giving, praying, and fasting. And in Jesus' day, they were seen as these great things a person could do to demonstrate their devotion to God. So he's like taking it head on. He's saying, listen, these things that you do in front of people, I need to make sure that your motive is right. If you're following me, if you're being a follower of me, I need you to make sure that these things are right. So I want to be clear about how we do these things, okay? And so today we're going to take this first example and we're going to talk about giving. And then in the next few weeks, John will preach on the other two, and there's some other things in chapter 6 that we're gonna deal with. And so this first thing that we've got to understand is there's this idea of showy giving. I don't know if that's a real word or not, but I'd put it on there, so we're going to say that it's a word. Showy. Is it it might be a word. I don't know. Anyway, showy giving. And he says this. He says, so when you give to the needy, Now, as soon as I say giving, some of you all probably thought we were going to talk about tithing today. Nah. This has nothing to do with tithing. Tithing's important. We've talked about it before. We'll probably talk about it again. We'll experience that kind of stuff. But today we're going to pinpoint what he's really talking about here. And he says, so when you give to the needy, what is this giving? See, Jesus isn't talking about giving in general. He is specifically talking about giving to people in need. The word he uses here can mean do something for someone else. But most times in the Bible, it's a word for money given to those in need. So usually it meant poor people who didn't have enough money. This included beggars who didn't have jobs and were looking for a handout. It included handicapped people who, because of their injury, couldn't work and couldn't do those things. But for us today, I think this verse is referring to how we give to people in need. Some of you may want to bring food to that, what did John call it? This box on a stick 4x4 stick that you put stuff in, There's all kinds of those around Mount Washington. I think there's like 4 or 5 of them around Mount Washington, and you put food in them. So maybe you all want to help out in that way, and there you can bring canned goods or box food, and somebody will fill that out, and then somebody in need will come and take it and use it at their house. That's cool. Like that's a giving to someone in need. You also might think about giving to someone who's struggling just in general in their life. It includes what you do and what you spend on individuals in need. It includes other things like, sponsoring a child for Compassion International. It could mean you supporting someone going on a mission trip to do God's work somewhere overseas or in Mexico or wherever we want to go. It includes your donations to the Salvation Army or Goodwill or any of that kind of stuff. This is what Jesus is talking about. He's saying, listen, there are these times where you give to people in need. And all of this brings glory to Jesus. And he's saying, so when you do this giving of things to people in need, make sure that it's not showy. That's the kind of giving that Jesus is talking about. And I don't think it just includes money, because time is precious. How many of you feel like you have too little time during the week? How many of you feel like that? Most of us. Like 6 of you raised your hand, but I feel like most of us feel that way. Y'all ruin my illustrations when you don't raise your hands. It's audience participation day. Okay, so 6 of us feel like we don't have enough time. But the truth is, we struggle with time. And when you give your time in different areas for those who are in need, whatever the need is, man, it makes a huge impact. And when you do it with the right motivation, it makes even more of an impact. And so he says, when you give to meet the needs of other people, that's what I like. Not the needs that meet your own, not giving to the things that meet your own needs, but to the things that meet needs of others. That's what I'm longing for. So in Matthew 6:2, he goes on and he says, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. There's no real evidence that people actually blew trumpets and all that good stuff when they gave. But Jesus is just using this metaphor for just color. This is what I love about Jesus. He had a good sense of humor. And if you read through Scripture and you know the context of things and you can kind of understand the ebbs and flow of his language a little bit, sometimes you catch these things where Jesus is just kind of like, I know no one blows a trumpet, but it's this colorful way to describe how people made sure that others knew that they were giving, or others knew that you were taking care of a need. So basically he's saying, when you give, don't make a big deal out of it. Don't attract attention to it. Don't advertise how much you're giving or when you're giving or anything like that. Don't show off your generosity. Then see, Jesus refers to hypocrites, and once again, this word is a word that's like for actors, someone who plays a role. And here, the idea is someone who is pretending to give because he cares about the needs of someone or some people or persons. Because he wants to put on an act in front of people. That's what a hypocrite means. And they're really trying to worship God or whatever, but the real motives is to be honored by their peers. They want people to be impressed with their spirituality or their devotion to God or their kind heart. But Jesus warns us not to follow this example because he does not recognize that generosity, and he will not reward it. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Jesus' term here, which I find fascinating here, is Jesus' term here is like a business term. It means to be paid in full and issued a receipt. Those who give to impress people, they get what they want. In fact, they get precisely what they want and nothing more. Attention or recognition by their peers or a pat on the back. I mean, we're all guilty of that, right? There are things that we've done in our lives where we did it because it felt good for people to recognize that we did something cool, right? We all been there? Am I the only one? I don't think so. I feel like we do that. I feel like in times we do that. And Jesus is saying, be careful with that because your reward is in full. You're getting exactly what you want, that pat on the back, and you're getting nothing more. This is showy giving. Religious acts of worship designed to impress people instead of serving God. Notice these key elements. I'm going to put them up here. The key elements of showy giving is this. There's an action. It's publicized giving, the idea of tooting your own horn. And then there's the motive behind it, and it's done for men's praise. And the result is this reward is paid in full, and you receive human praise. That's what you get. So in the showy giving idea, this is what you get. Those three things, you get that and nothing else. Jesus then goes on and tells us in verse 3 how we should give to people in need. He says, but when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. There's this idea of showy giving, and then more along the lines of what Jesus is calling his people who have chosen to follow him, who've chosen to follow this kingdom way of life. He's saying, listen, there's a secret way to do it. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. Essentially, it means don't even tell your best friend. That's hard. Because you want to tell somebody when you do something good. It's just human nature. We want to do that. Sometimes not because we want to toot our own horn, but just because we want someone else to jump in on that. And so the word secret refers to a secret place. It's drawing this specific contrast with the hypocrites mentioned before, who distributed their gifts in public so that everyone could see. They do it on the streets to be sure that everyone knew that they were giving and how much they were giving. And they were doing all this stuff and really showy with it. And he's just saying, don't do that. So what would happen if I stood up every Sunday and thanked our major donors that go to church here? Like, man, I appreciate it. Stand up. Good on you. First of all, I don't know who those major donors are. Never seen it. I'm not privy to that information. Or what if, as we're thinking about, and we might, someday build a building. What if we let all the major donors pick their own seat and put their name on their seat because, hey, listen, you gave a lot of money. That's a big deal. But there's no doubt, if you were going to get recognition, there could be this temptation in your spirit to love that recognition and to your motives be questioned on why you do what you do. But if no one knows what you give or how much you give in time or money, then there's not much temptation in order to get the praise of men. Back in February, when I was still working at Eastside, we did a thing called Night to Shine. It is a prom event for people with special needs. It was an awesome event. We did it because we want people to know that they matter to God. That's why that was the main motivation. Everyone matters to God, and because everyone matters to God, everyone should get to experience the things in life that are fun and inclusive and all that stuff. And so we did this, not for the praise of men, not for any of that stuff. But as we did it, news crews started to show up. And if I'm being real honest, I had to do interviews. I had them ask me a bajillion questions. I was on the news. It was all that stuff. It's almost as famous as Royce being in his Papa John's commercial. I see everybody knows that. And I allowed myself for a couple minutes, like I really allowed myself for a few minutes to think about, like, what is my motivation? Because I'm answering questions. I'm feeling all good because I'm standing in front of a camera and they're asking me, like, they want my opinion and all this stuff. And so, like, I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And so in mid conversations with people, I'm checking myself to make sure, like, am I doing this because this feels good from a personal standpoint? Because it kind of does. Like, people want to talk to me and all this stuff. And it's a difficult line. When you're doing something, you're giving of your time or your money to help those in need, and it can get blurry. And Jesus is saying, like, listen, you got to watch that. You got to really take heed and kind of watch that stuff so you make sure you're doing it with the right motives. And then he's like, and so I want to piggyback off this a minute, just so we can really understand this. I don't think that this verse means literally everything must be secret. Like, I don't think that. Because one day, check this out. One day, Jesus is sitting at the temple with his students, and they're together. They watched people putting their offering in the collection. And when Jesus saw the widow, she dropped 2 coins in. He praised this woman for her gift and for her and praised her for her generosity. Paul does the same thing in the Macedonian church. He thanks them for their generous gift to the poor people of Jerusalem, and then he boasts about the pledges that the church in Corinth made for the same relief project. See, Jesus isn't laying down this rule that says everything that you do needs to be this secret. Everything that you do needs to make sure that your right hand doesn't know what your left hand is doing. He's not saying that. He's not saying that secret giving is the only thing that honors God. He's saying that if you're tempted to give for the wrong motives, which happens sometimes, if you might be tempted to give so that you look good in front of people, you can remove that temptation by making sure everything that you do is secret. Because we all like attention. Well, most of us do. We all like to have people think highly of us, to not think bad about us. And so it's easy to do that. It's not an issue if you know, it's not an issue of who knows or what they think about the gift or if you even know how much it is. It's an idea about your motive of why you did what you did, and was it for people or was it for God? Those are the real questions, because the reason is so important. That reason is so important to guard our motives in giving, because the why we give determines the effect it has on our lives. And Jesus urges us to give in secret so that our motives will be completely pure. And then the Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. Those who give with pure motives get a reward from God. That's big. And so if you give for the showy way, I do it because my wife wants me to, or my husband wants me to, or I do it because I get service hours and my company really likes that, or my school really likes that. All these things, if you give them for that reason, like, your reward has been given to you. But if you do it in secret, Jesus tells them, you get a reward from God. And so what's the reward? What is that reward? God's reward could be open in front of people, or it could be secret. His reward could come now in this life, or it may not come until we're on the other side of heaven. Your reward could be both in this life and the next life. Jesus doesn't promise a specific reward or mention a specific time, but he does say that you will be rewarded. The word he uses for reward literally means to pay back a debt. That's the way the Bible describes it. If you give to people in need with pure motives, not for how it looks, but because you love God and you love his people and you want to honor him, then God will pay you back. God is in debt to us when we give with pure motives, when we help people in need with pure motives. Proverbs 19:17 says, "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done." Giving to the poor is compared to loaning money to God. In 2 Corinthians 9:6 and 11, he says this, "Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will reap generously. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God." And he gives this promise in Philippians 4:18 and 19. He says, "I have received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied now that I have received from," whatever that dude's name is. I can't ever say their names. Can it just be like Todd? "I have received from Todd the gift that you sent. They are a fragrant offering and acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus." See, there is a reward for those who give to people in need. It may be more money, it may not be. It may be repayment, it may be recognition, it may be now, it may be later. The one who gives to the needy will be rewarded, but that reward is only for those who give with pure motives. And so now we can see that complete contrast of showy giving and secret giving. Your action in secret giving, it's not public, it's private, it's confidential. The reason for giving is not recognition from men, but rather to honor and obey God. And the result is not praise from men, but rather a reward from God. And so Jesus says, you want to be a follower of me? You want to be part of the kingdom? Check your motives at the door. Check them. Because if you're doing it so that you look good, you're going to look good in our eyes. But God says, listen, you got what you paid for. If that's what you want, you got what you paid for. You want a piece of the reward that I'm willing to give you? Change your motives. And that goes back to 5 when he's saying, listen, it's not just about what you do or what you don't do. It's about the reasons behind it, the motivation behind it. And so when you have acts of worship, when you want to give to the needy, make sure you're giving to the needy in a way that reflects your love for me and your devotion to me and your acceptance of me in your life. And he's saying, listen, that's the way that you get this full reward. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is worthless. And so you have opportunities, because this is a known fact. God wants you to take care of the needs of people. He does. And it's not because he needs your money or he needs your time. It's because giving to people in need is an act of worship. Just like singing songs or listen to somebody preach or being in your small groups together or serving in small groups together, all this stuff, this is all an act of worship. And that's why it's important that when you give your time, you give your money to those in need, that you have the right motive. If you make a huge contribution to the poor so that people praise you, then you will get that praise. But if you unselfishly take care of people in need because you want to honor God, there's something for you. So the question is not just are you giving, but why are you giving?